Okay, welcome to our Erev Shabbat class, Parashat Nissabim. Can one be forced to worship God and to observe his Torah? This week's Parashat begins what is arguably not only one of the most significant events in the history of the Jewish people and the history of the world, but I might dare to say and possibly suggest that it is the most significant event in the history of Am Yisrael and the Jewish people. It sounds like an exaggeration, but allow me to explain. The Parashat, Tem Nissabim Hayom Kulechem Lifnei Adonai Elohechem. Moshe Rabbeinu announces to the nation after he assembles them, and that assembly began in last week's Parashat, that you stand in Nissabim. You stand what? Standing upright, yes, but standing ready, presenting yourselves in the entirety of the people before God. Hayom, today, what's today? Whenever you're addressing someone, you're addressing them in the present. There's never a need to say today. There's no other place in the Torah, actually, where Moshe, Hashem, addresses a person, a people, and say, I'm addressing you today, because it is today automatically. Hayom can mean so many things. According to the Zohar, Hayom was the day of Rosh Hashanah, which of course we always align according to Hachamim, Parashat Nissabim, before the great day of judgment, before the Shabbat, before Rosh Hashanah. Hayom, according to some Mefarshim, we all know that this is towards the very end of the 40 years and the very end of the life of Moshe Rabbeinu. Some say the last few days. There are those that say that this is the last day of the life of Moshe Rabbeinu, alav hashalom, the fleeting hours. Of course, that would mean that he squeezed a lot into the last day, Parashat Vayelech and Ha'azino Zot HaBeracha. Be that as it may, Hayom may well be his last day on earth. What else is the implication of Hayom? Well, what happened? What were they assembled for? What were they assembled? What were they readied for? What was Moshe Rabbeinu about to announce to them? Well, this is, of course, what we've discussed numerous times in this class, a berit, a covenant, a pact, an agreement between Borei Olam, the creator, and Am Yisrael, known as the berit Ba'arbot Moab, the berit and the plains of the Moab territory and the banks of the Jordan River. And this is, of course, the second covenant entered to Am Yisrael, the first being the berit Be'horev, the covenant by Har Sinai. Of course, the obvious question is, and one which we have addressed several times in our Friday classes, which we won't address again in detail, but why two covenants? Why is there a need for Hashem to enter into a berit a second time, almost 40 years later with the nation? And we're not going to address the numerous reasons why that is now. Suffice it to say, it was necessary to enter into, I don't want to say a do-over or a repeat, but certainly another extension or maybe even corrective covenant with Am Yisrael. And I venture to say, even though it's very safe to say, as one who studies Torah, learns Torah, and analyzes Torah, and a member of this nation, that the greatest day in our history, and by extension world history, is Ma'amad Har Sinai, the revelation at Sinai, Matan Torah. Of course, maybe the most miraculous supernatural day was Kriyat Yam Suf, but that was in a unilateral event from God to people. It wasn't an engaged event of people. Matan Torah is safe to say it was the greatest day, but as I suggested in the opening line, it is possible that this was even greater. And the question is why and how I can be so bold as to suggest that. And the reason is because if this is a second covenant and all the reasons why we needed a second berit, perhaps it was more important than the first berit. What tells me that? Well, first, in terms of the similarity, we know that the description of the physical presentation and readiness of the people is the same. The Baal HaTurim points out, Atem Nissabim Hayom, Nissabim, you're standing, you're ready. What was the description by Har Sinai? It says there with the very same root word, Vayit Yasebu Betahti Tahar. They stood ready and prepared, eager and well presented at the foot of the mountain. That description draws that similarity, but here is what is unique about the opening of this covenant, which is not like the original. By the way, it's not the opening because the covenant started in last week's Parashat Ki Tavo with the cursing and the blessings and the prediction. But the official actual consecration of this covenant. Let's continue. It says, God, you're standing here before me today. Then there's a description of who's standing there before him. Rashechem, Sheptechem, Zikdechem, Veshotrechem, calls Ish Israel. Tapechem, Neshechem, Vecherecha, Shebecher Machanecha, Mechotei Ba'asecha, Ad Shoah Bemecha. Never before was there such a description, even though it's seemingly unnecessary, because it says Kulechem, the first pasuk says all of you. And yet the Torah saw fit, Hashem, Moshe Rabbeinu, saw fit to describe in detail what categories are included in this impending covenant. Your leaders, your elders, your hachamim, all of the nation, women, children, converts, from the great exalted people to the basic rudimentary blue-collar workers. They were explicitly enumerated in the Pisukim. Now, that does not mean in the first covenant in Horeb, Brit Horeb and Har Sinai, that they weren't all included. But here there was a reason, lest someone think that for some reason entering to Eretz Yisrael and starting in a certain way the story, the unfolding story of Jewish history, that this was not meant for every single member, that someone's exempt, that there wasn't an expectation of subservience to God and to the covenant by every single member, maybe not women, maybe not children, maybe if you're of a certain pedigree, a certain level of prestige, maybe you have certain lineage, you have a degree of wisdom, etc. To leave it beyond the shadow of a doubt, as the Torah would go on to explain in this parasha that no one's exempt, the Torah named every member. And then a description, which we didn't really see the first time around. By the way, we're in Perek Kaftet, the beginning of the parasha, chapter 29, Pasuk Yud Aleph, verse 11. And the reason is, or the purpose is, Le'obrecha bebrit Adonai Elohecha u'ba'alato, to enter you into the covenant of Hashem, your God, and alato, and your swearing in. Another terminology we didn't see the first time around. And then, as we saw similar terminology in last week's parasha, and definitely at Ma'amad Har Sinai, Matan Torah, the objective of this berit and the great benefit is described in Pasuk Yud Bet. So that God can uphold you, can appoint you, can officially, let's say, label you and exalt you as his nation. And he's your God, and playing out the promise and the pledge to the forefathers. In other words, this covenant officially ushers in Am Yisrael as the chosen nation of God to be the emissaries of the Creator on planet Earth from that point throughout all of history. It's really spine-tingling when you think of it. They were standing there in front of Hashem, and he's telling them, I choose you. Again, similar to Ma'amad Har Sinai, but here is a major difference. The following two Pesukim. It's not only you. You're not the only ones who are entering into this covenant and this swear and this pact and this agreement with me today, says Hashem. Ki et asher yeshno po amanu omed hayom lefnei Adonai Eloheinu. Not just all those who stand literally and conceptually before me today, before Hashem, ve'et asher enenu po amanu hayom. Rather, also those who is not standing here before, well, the future generations, us. The next 3,300 somewhat years of Jewish history also entered into the exact same covenant. So again, it's possible to say, based on these descriptions, and just based on the way Hashem presented the opportunity to Am Yisrael, And because it's the second time around, and because you can possibly say it's the more permanent one, that this perhaps is more significant than Matan Torah. And this, therefore, would be indeed the greatest, most significant moment. But that's arguable. But I want to address my opening question. It very much seems in the last two Pesukim that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving no choice to those that are not standing there before him. Of course, if they were, I'm not sure if they gave him a thumbs up, if they waved a hand, if they said yes, or just a big smile, or he read their mind. Obviously, they accepted the offer. And obviously, they entered into the Berit, the covenant, that holy, significant moment in history. But when Hashem says, I'm making a covenant with those who are not standing here before me, that is not only daunting, that seems very impositional. That means that I am demanding that someone who wasn't here to shake my hand accepts the deal. And that coming with it comes tremendous burden, in a positive way, of course, of obligation, and also serious consequences we saw in graphic detail in last week's parasha for those who don't observe the covenant and commit to Hashem. What if I don't want to enter and I will unfortunately lose out on the incredible opportunity of what is the fate and destiny of this nation and all the potential rewards, but I'll also alleviate myself from potential harm and punishment. And of course, explicitly the parasha goes on to say that that's not a possibility, but why not? And how can you impose? And this is a question that's really very philosophical, that is addressed and breached by a number of the commentators. So what is the answer to this? I'll first begin with the Midrash. The Midrash Tanhuma on this pasuk says something fascinating, but something that we didn't hear for the first time. And that is that when it says Imanu Hayom, with us today, not just Ahmed standing physically, but with us here, present today, is Kol Hanefashot Elu Haneshamot Ha'atidot Behibarot She'en Bahem Mamash. Those are the souls that weren't yet created and instilled in bodies, but that were going to be potentially members of the Jewish nation, meaning all the future members of the Jewish nation, not in body, but in soul, in the Shema, were present, including ourselves, at that incredibly faithful moment of destiny. Now, there is a midrash similar to this, that happened on Ma'amad Har Sinai as well. Now, conceptually, therefore, you can say that if we were all there, we all accepted the deal. We gave a spiritual thumbs up. And I mean that. I mean that however we can wrap our minds around that and conceptualize this, there were souls there. There were future souls there. We were present. That's very hard to explain in a rational way, but the Midrash is conveying to us something very deep, and at least something that we can register as a possible solution to our philosophical question. There is a very unique approach. Now, there are two legal arguments given. One is a basic legal argument, I'll say, and that is the Ben Bahia. The Ben Bahia says something very simple. When you have a tree that's planted and it grows roots and it has a trunk and it starts to rise, the branches that come out of that tree really have no choice. In other words, if it's an orange tree, they have no free will to decide, I'd like to be an olive branch. That's very nice. You belong and you're emanating, you're stemming from an orange tree. That's just the way it is. The fact that we are a lineage, we're descendants of people that accepted this covenant, and it's literally, therefore, in their blood. It becomes part of the fabric of their existence. It is who they are. You can't not be, let's say, ethnically who your father was. There's no choice. This spiritual state, you can say, this agreement with God, this godly state of existence, is something that completely transformed who we were at that time in that generation. that is passed down to the next generation. That is actually the fabric of your existence. There's no choice. You're a branch from the tree. It's a legal argument, you could say. An even more legal argument is the Akedah, the author of the Akedah Yishak. And he says as follows. Technically speaking, if one was to own a slave, an Avid, let's say an Avid Kanani, in the old days, and that Avid has children, you're the owner of those children as well. Now, what if that person was to sell the slave to somebody else? He now owns the slave. And not only that, the subsequent children that that slave has will also be owned by the new owner. We were avadim hayinu lefar'o b'Misraim. We were owned as slaves in Egypt thousands of years ago. And we say in the Haggadah, if God didn't take us out, we would be slaves somewhere else, but certainly wouldn't be independent. God redeemed us. He acquired us. He bought the slaves. We became his servants. And when he did, legally speaking, you can say that the sons, the descendants of those slaves become his as well. It's a legal argument that therefore we are thrust into the ownership of God after this transaction was made, when we shook God's hand in that covenant. And therefore also it was a reason for us to be locked into the covenant without a choice. This is who we are. And by the way, how fortunate and how prestigious is that to be the sons of Bani Matem LaHashem, the children of God in this descendancy. And I'd like to throw in to the ring, to the arena, one more possible legal argument. And that is that we have a principle. And that is Zakin la'adam shelo b'fanav. If you have a choice to do something on someone's behalf, to accept a deal, to accept a gift, to accept ownership of something, if it's a chov, if it's a possible potential detriment of the person, who are you? Who are we to accept that? No one asked me, and certainly I can't thrust my fellow man into a detrimental situation without his permission. But a zechut, something that's meritorious, something that's beneficial, zakila adam shelo b'fanav. Right? If I found $1 million cash on the sidewalk, I can say, I am hereby acquiring this for my friend, Mr. Abraham. And it works. And this indeed is the greatest meritorious, fortunate gift that can possibly be offered to man, to be the chosen people of God, and with it receive his Torah and all of the great perks and benefits that come with it. Our destiny, our redemption, our future. That generation had a legal permission to accept that deal, and without the go-ahead and the permission of future generations. And even though it seems like they took upon for us without knowledge also the possible negatives that come with it, i.e., if you don't keep the covenant, the punishments and the consequences, etc. But the truth is that we know that there is no such thing as negative in this covenant. It's all zechut. There's nothing that God does that is not righteous, and the plan for any Jew that does anything positive is immeasurably good, and therefore this is all a zechut. And in so following, one can accept this deal for someone else. The bottom line is, it was done, and it was fair, and it was right, because the Kadosh Baruch Hu allowed it to happen. In fact, through Moshe Rabbeinu, he announced that it would happen. That engagement, the covenant, the berit, the holy agreement between man and God that made us an official nation forever, the second berit ba'arvot Moab, was something that we, the future generations, entered into so explicitly with Hashem. And how lucky are we, therefore, because of this great moment of Atem Nissabim Hayom, on that fateful day, that we too are part of the covenant, we too are the chosen people, and as they say, the rest is history.